I'm going to show you how to use frequency separation along with some newly added tools to Photoshop to quickly retouch your photos and keep them natural looking. Gives you the most control and doesn't end up with the photo looking kind of plasticky and super fake. Frequency separation is separating the color of a photo into one layer and the texture into another layer. That way you can edit them separately, so you can edit things like wrinkles in the texture layer, and skin blotchiness and unevenness in the color layer, and keep the most control over your edits as possible. To get started, I'd recommend removing as many blemishes like zits and pimples and stuff like that as possible beforehand. If you leave these when you do frequency separation, you'll have to remove them from both the texture and the color layer. So I'm going to start out by duplicating our layer with Command or Control J, zooming in, and you can see that we've got a few blemishes here on this photo, but I'm actually going to show you a quick way to make them pop out even more so that you know how to quickly go in and change those. I'm going to come down here to our layers panel and click on the adjustment layers, and I'm going to select black and white. Now in the properties panel, I'm going to bring the red way down. You can see it's kind of focusing those red spots a bit more for us. I'm probably going to end up right here for this specific photo. I'm going to bring the yellows up a little bit, probably about right here. Now we're not going to be keeping this on the photo. This is just to help us find the things we're going to be removing. So I'm now going to come over here and I'm going to start with the new remove tool. And I'm going to come up here, and a lot of times when you're doing blemish removal or photo retouching in Photoshop, you're going to want sample all layers checked so that you can do it all on a new layer. I'm actually going to turn this off because since I'm using a black and white adjustment layer, it would have made our edits in black and white. So that's why I duplicated the layer and did all that stuff. So I'm going to select this one, which is going to be our edits. And I'm just going to come in and remove some blemishes. Now, right away, you'll see that it kind of blurred it a little bit, which is why I don't love using the fancy remove tool. So I'm going to undo that. Because of that, I like to use the patch tool, which gives me a little more control over what texture I use when I'm removing these blemishes. I am going to be using the content aware patch tool, and I'm going to turn off sample all layers once more. The photo I'm going to be editing today is one I took very close with a very low depth of field. It's one that it's fun to leave in a lot of texture to keep things interesting and detailed looking, but you don't want some of those blemishes and stuff in there because you want the person, the model, whoever it is, to still feel confident in themselves, and also for the focus to be them as a person or as your subject and not what's on their skin. So really quick, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to select some of the blemishes like this and just remove them using the patch tool and speed this all up. Just a heads up when using the black and white technique, with this photo, our model has a lot of freckles, so sometimes you may want to turn it on and off to make sure that you're removing blemishes and not their freckles, because you do want to leave those on the model. Just in here, cleaning things up. Cleaning things up. Oh yeah, cleaning things up. Try to keep your patch tool spots as small as possible, because that is what will keep things from blurring out. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but you know, do what you can. I'm going to now delete our black and white layer because we're not going to use that. And I'm going to take our edit layer and I'm going to duplicate it twice. And this is where we're going to get a bit more control by doing it ourselves as opposed to an action. We're going to come up here to filter, down to blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, so the goal here is to blur the photo until you've basically removed all of the texture. Now it is something that you're just going to kind of get used to as time goes on and you do this more often, but there is another step later on that you can kind of double check your work. Okay, with the blur set up, we're now going to go to texture, image, and apply image. With this apply image box pulled up, I'm going to select layer and change it to blur. I'm then going to go down here to where it says blending, and I'm going to change this to subtract. Now we're going to change the scale and offset values. Now every time you do frequency separation, you're going to put in 2 and 128, and this is what you're going to end up with, this kind of grayscale image where you can see the texture coming through. Now, I have no idea why the scale is 2 and the offset is 128. That's just the mathematical thing that people figured out and it works. So always do 2 and 128. Now with our texture layer here, I'm going to click on the blend mode and bring it down to linear light. This technique also allows for you to kind of paint with your shadows and do some more detailed contouring. Now, this isn't the only way to do this, but this is a very highly detailed way to do it. So if that's something that appeals to your editing style, you'll be able to use that with today's technique as well. So now that we've got our frequency separation set up, I'm going to turn off the texture layer and you're just going to see our blur layer. Now, in the past, the most common way to edit frequency separation was to use your brush tool and bring the flow really low. And then coming here in areas where we have bags under the eyes or some blotchiness to just kind of sample nearby and do some coloring on top like this. Okay, I'm going to turn back on the texture so you can see how that looks. And we're going to do a before and after by turning off the frequency separation layer. See, so we've kind of started to remove those bags. I'm now going to turn off the brush layer and show you another option that you can use with frequency separation. So if you press Command or Control J to duplicate the layer, I'm going to use the lasso tool here with a pretty high feather, and you can just kind of circle the area you're trying to even out. And I'm going to come up here to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. As you can see, by raising up the blur, you're blurring the color underneath the texture, and you can kind of even things out that way. Okay, we're back to our photo, and I went a bit overboard because I wanted to show you how you can pull things back if you have gone overboard like this one. So what's awesome about frequency separation is you can come in here to the opacity and just kind of bring the opacity down from your frequency separation group. And as you can see, her freckles and some of her skin are coming back. So if I turn the frequency separation on and off, I did even out the skin using this, and we were able to keep some of that actual texture and the freckles in that below layer. Now, if you'd like to go a step even further, we can actually contour from this point forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer above the frequency separation layer that we're using. This new layer we made, we're going to name it Shadows. And I'm going to go back to the brush and then select my blending mode and change it to color burn. Now, there's a lot of ways to do contouring, enhancing your shadows and your highlights. I'm going to be showing you using the brush tool, but you can use the dodge and burn tool, for example. I like the brush tool because you can more specifically select the colors you want, but it does take more time and some nitpicking of which colors you use. I'm going to be going through it very quickly, so I'm not going to be very particular about my colors, but let's see how things turn out. So I'm going to sample a darker skin tone of hers, and I'm going to come in here and kind of just brush in where we would want to contour some shadows. I'm using a brush with a low flow that is very blurred out. I'm now going to make a new layer, name it Highlights. And instead of color burn, I'm going to set it to color dodge. And now see, I'm drawing in some more highlights. This is like therapeutic almost. Now I'm going to group these together. Okay, there's a really quick and dirty contour just to kind of show you some of the things that you can do. Just like before when we lowered the opacity to change the intensity of what we've done, you can do that again on your contour, which for me is already being brought down because it's inside our frequency separation folder. But I want to bring this down even more. So after you've adjusted the intensity of how much you want your contouring to show up, you can do a before and after. So there is some quick and basic skin retouching using frequency separation, as well as some other techniques to add some contouring, as well as even out the skin and remove some blotchiness. You can make this as strong and stylized as you want and kind of push more towards the unrealistic realm, or you can try and keep things nice and simple and bring down your opacities to keep things really realistic looking while just evening out the skin so that people are more likely to focus on the subject themselves instead of the blemishes on their skin. Hopefully this was helpful. Be sure to follow for more Photoshop and other design related tutorials, and until next time, bye bye.